Okay, I think we're going live. I think we might be live.
Awesome.
And this time I didn't mute myself, so bonus. Everyone can hear us, I think. Hello,
Great.
everyone in the chat. Lovely names there: Rabbitfly, Rick, everybody else. Welcome. Hi, Eduardo. Thank you for coming. Um, Today I'm very pleased to be joined by James Fairbairn. James has been a lovely Twitter acquaintance. And tell us a little bit about what you do, James, and how maybe how you got into Wardley mapping and kind of how did we get here?
Yeah, so I guess I work in the games industry, and I've gone from being a sort of engineering type to, over the course of several years becoming more of a product type, and now I'm sort of a bit more of a strategy type person. So um, yeah, and I started reading Simon Wardley's blog posts back in the day. It's like Simon said, it takes you 7 years to decide that you want to engage with Wardley maps, right? And I think it was pretty much on the money for me. So this last couple of years, I've really been digging deep into Wardley mapping,
Yeah,
and yeah, that's how I sort of got into it.
excellent. And David's back from his journey in the internet abyss. Welcome back. Um, so I think I love that journey of like going through multiple kind of roles. That sounds really familiar to me as well. And David's kind of experiencing some of this as well. Like although he's like more from the design background, but I think this idea of I don't know, you start out doing certain things and then you realize what you enjoy doing and you realize what interests you and then eventually you end up in a place and you're like, well, how did I get here? That's the fun part of all this. So I love that you're excited about worthy mapping and strategy and things like that. And you kind of had this idea the other day about trying to express in a worthy map something that's been on your mind about, in particular, Spotify and Apple, or should I say like Spotify versus Apple? Um, I'm curious. I'm curious what prompted you to kind of be interested in this problem in the first place.
Yeah, so I think what interests me about Wardley mapping is how it talks about evolution. It starts from a very technological standpoint, right? It talks about technological evolution is driven by supply and demand competition. Um, and I started to think, or I started to see especially in the sort of space of big tech, that things things were happening in industries that didn't, to me, seem to be entirely driven by supply and demand competition, but were rather driven by sort of um, other factors, like, for example, incumbency power or whatever. And so, um, to me, that felt like either a limitation in Wardley mapping as a framework, because it's like, well, evolution is driven by supply and demand competition unless you're one of the big five tech companies, or that's a misunderstanding on my part, and there is a way to express those kinds of forces, those kinds of incumbency forces, in a Wardley mapping context, so you can sort of view those forces against the normal forces of supply demand competition, right? So
Got it.
so
Yeah.
that's where I was sort of trying to understand, like, you know where um, where you have sort of huge incumbents using their leverage to gain dominance in sort of adjacent categories. How do you um, how do you express that in a Wardley map, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of where I started. Does
Yep.
that make sense?
That makes
Yeah.
a lot of sense, and I'm curious too because it's funny like spending so much time doing mapping, right? Like you've got your basic parts, you've got kind of the from the start of it, like what game are you even playing as in the mind of the person mapping who what game are you trying to play, why are you even bothering to understand the space.
Yeah.
You've got the users of the system, the people that you serve, you're trying to produce value for them, you're trying to benefit them in some way, and like then they have those specific needs, the particular things that they're expecting from the system. And I think like we hope to kind of oversimplify and think like it's just one user and one need and everything's fine. You can just do simple examples like that. But in fact, the truth of most systems is that it's many users, so many. And like it's not just it's not just like the typical customers kind of buyers kind of scenario. It's like customers, buyers, regulators, educators. You've got upstream and downstream users. And in fact, there's like a post I wrote a long time ago about like how you're always within a bigger market,
Yeah.
or bigger context, and you're depending on other people. Like you're the user of someone, right?
Yeah.
And there's
Yeah.
so many other users on top of the people who you're serving too.
Right. Right.
If you're helping a parent do something well, like the people that they're serving might be their children, for example. And so it's like
Right.
there's this messy thing. And yeah, like incumbents and understanding like how these big organizations make adjacent plays, it's a big
Yeah.
question mark in my head, because the only answer I have right now is, well, you just have a big messy system that you model, and then at some point you realize that there are so many moving parts that of course a startup couldn't handle all thousands of these different kind of global whatevers or what
Right.
have you. But I don't know
Right.
beyond that.
Right. Yeah. And so, uh, yeah, I think the challenge is being able to, like, I want to be able to put the sort of simple sort of micro level model into the same map as those sort of macro effects, right? And
Yeah.
the right, and the challenge is, how do you do that, and how do you pick the right components, right? How do you know which components to ignore, I guess, is the thing, right? It's like Spotify is in a market. It's the music market, right? And they've pretty much defined that market since the beginning of the music streaming era. And I'm thinking like Gen Z now, I guess. But like Spotify is also in the smartphone market in a way, right? But you don't, like, you're not gonna, like, when you're Wardley mapping your space as a sort of some sort of digital business, you're not going to do like the whole smartphone ecosystem as well, right? You can't drag all of that in there. But like, what need does the smartphone satisfy, right? Like suddenly, that's just like every all of computing. So
Yeah.
so yeah, like where do you draw the line? What are heuristics for how you draw the line? What you include in that map, right? That's
Okay.
and I really do, like, I think the challenge for us at this moment, like looking at the map, is we've got a sort of basic music map, and how do we take the massive leap to say, well, where is Apple playing, right? Where, or like, how do we start, I guess.
So I've just revealed the map to the audience so they can kind of see. And let's go through this real quick, and then I want to come back to the three kind of interesting questions, right? The incumbency question, the adjacency question, but also the macro micro question. How do
Yeah.
you fit big things and small things in the same map, or should you?
Right.
This is something that keeps coming up too. So at the very top of the map, we've got a listener, put a little person with a smiley face. And I think my cheeky proposal was that the need that we're going to fill for them is filling the void.
Yes, I think that was a very nice way of putting it.
So that's kind of the benefit that we provide to them. And as an initial kind of like set of sub needs or underlying needs to fill the void, like I'm kind of borrowing the practice from Jen Carlston last week, where she was or they were talking about intrinsic needs, and then they were talking about sort of supporting needs, and those are separate from the components of the system. So that was something that they pointed out, which I thought was really, really helpful. So doing the same kind of thing here, where it's we've got fill the void with music, but then underlying needs of discover new music and listen to a music collection. So do you agree with this so far? Like, does this seem like a reasonable starting place of users and needs for exploration?
Yeah, I think it's simple. That it's got that going for it. So, yes.
Yeah, simple and wrong, and very wrong. way too simple, perhaps. But so let's dig in, go in a little bit further underneath here. Like, how do we get these needs met? Well, it looks like the proposal that we're making is that on the listening to the music collection side, well, obviously you have to have some kind of streaming capability, some ability to actually listen to that music over the internet, let's say, and then a library from which to stream. And so, like,
Yep.
we're probably messing a couple different ideas together here, but like collection and library, I don't know. Like, but this seems roughly right enough. And the way we do that is through an app and music licensing, which is a whole world unto its own.
I think that's actually going to become a big part of, well, I, maybe that will become a part of this conversation later, right? Like
Mm.
the, daddy, where does music come from? Sort of thing. The answer is a record label. um, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
And if you've ever seen that map that Simon made of video streaming aggregators, feel like there's a similar map that we could make about this particular
Yeah.
space too.
Yeah.
And then the only thing we didn't cover was just compute and storage at the bottom, supporting the app,
Mhm.
vastly oversimplifying the whole thing. And then also the other need, right? Discovering new music. Let's say for the moment that the only way that we do that is through curated playlists and not, for instance, like AI magic or something. Um, so I guess the goal is not to be right here, but to tell a likely story of what could be happening here. Um, what's missing in order for us to have, like, where should we start digging if we wanted to have a conversation about incumbency? Where, like, if you were to like place a red sticky note or two here, like, where would you want to just start digging?
Yeah. So I think that is interesting, right? Like, so I want to start from like, my sort of hypothesized threat from Apple, which is they have a huge phone install base. The app is installed by default on all those phones, and so the threat. So on the one hand, there's a sort of like it's much cheaper for them to onboard new customers that way, and they also have this sort of like service bundling strategy, right? This bundled subscription thing,
Okay.
right? And so both of those feel like they're outside of this map. And so that's what, like, what I'm chipping away at is how do we get from like the clearly obvious thing, which is Apple Music's installed on every iPhone, which gives them a huge advantage in onboarding new customers. And how does that get us back into this map of like, okay, what does that mean for like people who want to listen to their music collection?
Okay. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so the obvious thing, right? Um, well, Apple Music is installed. So let's start by defining some of these terms maybe, and then see if we can like mash them together into this map and see if there's a place for them. So
Mm-hmm.
off to the right of the board, I'm kind of just like, okay, we've got the obvious thing. This is the statement. I'm just gonna put it in quotes so we know it's not like a component or something. And then down here, okay, there are a couple components within this statement, right? There's Apple Music.
Yep.
There's the iPhone.
Yep.
And this might be too much detail, but I'm just gonna get it out of my head just because I saw it was like installation. Um, I don't know what that means yet, but
Yeah.
we can figure this out. So these are the brand name things. What more generic kinds of concepts that you might find on a map do each of these instances belong to?
Yeah. So Apple Music is a music streaming service,
Okay.
right? And yeah, you can immediately see, okay, that goes above, in the map, right? It sort of intermediates the listen to music and the streaming. Uh,
So
so
is
I can
which
even
part of it?
just stick it, right? So can I just copy
Yeah.
it in there?
Yeah. Go ahead. Right.
So it's like we have issues of scale here. Uh,
Who did that? Certainly not me. Definitely not.
it's the joy of Mira.
Excellent.
Wait, what did I just do? I did the wrong thing. No, I did the right thing. So you need a music streaming service, and music streaming service needs streaming.
And just to
Uh,
disambiguate those real quick, when we say streaming versus music streaming, let's
streaming as a tech, right?
got it. Excellent. Okay.
Um,
Fabulous.
and and then music streaming service also needs music library, right? So it's essentially like, if I can get businessy for a second, it's like, well, we need content, we need channels, right?
All right.
So
Amen.
um, so there you go. That's that bit.
Okay, great. So we've already made like I think we're doing a great job of like incrementally improving the map already. So
Mhm.
it's a little bit by bit. Um, okay, so we've kind of taken care of this part of it. Now let's talk about like what the iPhone is.
Yeah, what is the iPhone?
In the context of music streaming,
So does anyone in the chat have a thought about what the iPhone is? Um, ah,
It's like one step above handheld compute.
right. Yes.
It's like a server in your hand almost at this point.
Right, but it's compute and uh it's compute and network. And compute and network gives you one thing, right? Computer network gives you access, I would say. Um,
I love what's happening in the chat right now. It's like it's a cybernetic extension into the interwebs.
great.
Tristan might be my favorite though. He says it's expensive.
What is that?
Oh man. Okay, so you said access. What do you mean by access here?
It's the way that you can connect to music streaming services, right? Like without so it's like, I'd say that yes, right. The iPhone is an example of an access device, right? And
Ooh,
then
access device.
right,
We're inventing words. I like this.
yeah, and then the access device actually has one really critical component, which is mobility,
Hmm.
right? Um,
Is
and the
that a
mobility,
quality of the access device, or is it its own like independent component?
uh, well, you can have a non-mobile access device, right? So you can have like a Sonos speaker or something,
That makes sense. Okay.
right? But a Sonos isn't what's driving the like ubiquity of these services, right? So yeah, so it's okay. So we'll say mobile access
Oh yeah,
device.
and the chat's like already ahead of us on this. Like, they're already like receiving device and already calling Sonos. Thank you all. This is really helpful. Okay, so should I specifically call this out as a mobile access device?
I think, yeah, let's do that for now.
Okay.
So, if there's one thing I've learned from Wardley mapping, it's just try it.
Yeah. Amen.
Okay, so where does that go though? Um,
Whew. Well, I'm tempted to say something about the app. Like it feels like it has something to do with the app, right? Because
the app needs a mobile access device,
Yeah.
so it's down there somewhere, right?
I think
Okay,
that's a solid place to start, in my opinion.
all right, I'm gonna stick that there and see what happens.
I'm already noticing too, like whenever I wrote compute and storage, um, I was not thinking about mobile phones. I was not thinking about the access device itself. I was thinking of the servers and storage facilities
Right,
of the service itself. So
right,
that more disambiguation needs to happen at some point there, but maybe not
yeah.
yet. Okay, so
Actually, well, let's just do that now. Let's just change compute to server,
awesome.
right?
Yes.
And then actually we'll delete storage because server includes storage and it's probably somewhere down. We don't care.
Yeah,
Um,
excellent. So we just like as a heads up to everyone who's watching, we just did like the rarest thing that would ever happen in a code base, which is delete code. Uh, we just deleted parts from our map because we found out and realized that they weren't relevant, and that's an amazing move to make. Okay.
I also just added that music library needs server as well in some
Mm, excellent.
oh,
Okay, yeah, I see that
one way.
connection.
Yeah. So,
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, and that's great because that connects back to the implied storage and all that kind of stuff.
yep.
Cool. Okay, so then if I come over here, so we got the iPhone kind of figured out. It's a mobile access device. Cool, cool. Handheld compute, handheld network, all that's implied. Uh, Here's a weird question: like installation, is that so? Remember, like we're pulling from this phrase of stuff that you said. Apple Music
Mhm.
is installed on every iPhone, and we're trying to understand how that connects to this bigger picture of incumbency and how they might kick Spotify's ass at some point. I don't know, maybe not. But installation, is that an important part of this, or is that just a cursory detail?
Yeah, so let me try and unpack that. I think it's critical um, because it lowers the barrier to signing up new customers,
Mm,
right? And so um, that's not a this is where sort of audio maps get difficult for me
mm,
is that sort of bridge between the sort of the abstract or the sort of non vendor specific version of the map
yep.
and the vendor specific one, right? It's
Mm.
like
Yep.
um,
Uh, Ryan brings up a really good point that I think is agnostic of which service, is that the iPhone needs the App Store
it
because
does.
that exists in the value stream.
It does.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, iPhone needs App Store or app needs App Store.
That's an interesting question. Like I'm seeing Mark Landy too
Mm.
saying an iPhone is an app store interface. And I'm like,
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really uh, correct and cynical way of saying it.
well, I mean, nobody said we had to be cheerful about all this.
Well, I think it makes sense too if you look at the history of iTunes and Apple being sort of like developing the iPod and, well, before the iPhone, I guess, but like the iPod and iTunes as a platform service.
Hmm.
So they sort of were like, and part of that, if I remember correctly, part of the early iTunes advantage was its licensing and distribution um, deals that they had. So it put them at like a way higher advantage than anybody else.
Hmm.
So I think that would be useful to have.
So, so sorry, licensing and distribution of music or of
Yeah,
yeah.
before, well, I don't know if their app, I think the App Store existed, the iTunes Store existed, but that was sort of like the main
Yeah.
way to get stuff onto your iPod. So I could see how the App Store is really kind of the phone is serving the App Store
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
I mean, unless you're getting stuff off of like a mobile browser on your phone,
Yeah.
well, on the
Hmm.
iPhone at least, you have to
Yep.
go through the App Store.
Right. So then it's kind of tricky because the mobile access device or the phone, right, is you I would agree the way you frame it is like it's serving the App Store. But it's also oh no, it's got an arrowhead. It's also it also like it's a runtime dependency, right? Like every time you open Spotify, you depend on your phone. Well, if you're doing it in a mobile way, right? So the app also has a runtime dependency on that phone. But yeah, you're right. Like the app depends on the App Store, and the App Store also uh, depends on mobile access devices, right? And the nature of those. So I'm trying to. Can you see when I highlight stuff? When I click stuff?
Not quite.
Oh, okay. So
Don't be
that
afraid
I
to like
need.
scribble with a pen too. That
How do I
seems to
scribble? Yeah, is that
there's
does
a
the pen go away if I okay, so
with Command
um
Z.
yeah. So there's these two different relationships, right? The 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 job that this is doing is distribution of apps, right? Uh and the job that this is doing is um is a giving consumers access to the app, but B also like um solidifying the incumbency of Apple, right?
Yep.
Um,
Because of the
that's
integration
doing
of the two.
right, exactly. And actually, the App Store is also doing that. So if you put together App Store and mobile access device, right, uh, this relationship here, right, that describes the means by which Apple has, that much of a lock on
Mm.
like consumer application distribution, right?
Fabulous. I think you've just unlocked it actually. Like so, let's just point at this for a second, and then I want to answer some questions from the chat real quick. But this, so originally the question that we had to get here was, how do we get from Apple Music is installed on every iPhone? And clearly that seems important for some reason, but we're not quite sure how or why it's important, at least in Wardley terms. And so then the question was like, is this something that Wardley doesn't help with, or is this something that we need to figure out how to express in this like sort of style? And I think you've just cracked it here, where basically it's about. So not only is it about the device itself, not only is it about the store, but it's the integration of these two things. They're very tightly integrated. And
Yeah.
so the extent to which you can constrain access to something through a particular app store that is tightly integrated with a particular mobile access device,
Right.
well, that seems interesting, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Go on, David.
I think that also brings up for me like Apple benefits from the competition because anything that goes through the App Store, they get a 30% cut,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
which is also kind of, and I think it's sorry, my eyes are not this good to look all the way. Rabbitfly, I think, was saying that the App Store is also a regulatory constraint.
Hmm.
So they can choose like who goes on there and does what. So they could exclude competition.
Right.
Like what was the Fortnite the game
Yeah.
game? I've
Yep.
played it. I know it.
Yeah.
But that's no longer on the App Store because of a dispute over similar stuff.
Yeah.
Yep. And I was also thinking of like Microsoft and Internet Explorer being bundled on everything. Like some of these issues we've seen before, and where if you push it too hard, you get kind of into some trouble.
Right.
Real quick,
And
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say quickly, I think the App Store also lives inside a bigger regulatory framework, right? And then you start to come into questions like when one App Store and one platform becomes too dominant, does that start to that's why we've got all these antitrust sort of rumblings going on is that essentially, like if you were to say Wardley maps describe markets, this is a point where the market is becoming distorted because of undue power in a particular dimension, right? So
Yeah.
so there is a role for regulation here as well, but right now, assuming that the regulation doesn't continue to sort of doesn't clamp down on these things, like how does that play out, and actually most specifically how do Wardley maps express that, right?
That's such a good point, and I especially like Wardley's the way he plays about making these different problems like kind of visible, and then like, hey, regulatory stuff tends to live in stage 3ish, stage 4ish kind of zones, and like, so how do you manage that transition? And I think
Right.
the frustrating thing with any system is that those transitions they don't take care of themselves. There are moments of local minima or maxima that
Yeah.
they hurt. So real
Yeah.
quick, there are 3 things I wanted to just respond to from in chat. One is, let me see, I'll make these green so they're not so scary. One was the quality of a component versus the, I'll say quality was one thing, bidirectionality, if I can spell, is another thing, and then there was one around the App Store is a package manager.
Yeah.
So I'll start from the bottom here. So this is an interesting point because there's a lot of stuff we already know about package managers, like from the world of software, and because especially of the open nature of those systems, you could perhaps study the way open source package managers, for example, say like Linux, what have you, what functions are necessary in those systems, and then see if that's a valid model to basically propose that maybe that's also what's happening behind the scenes at Apple. Like, so it's an implication of a design, even though we don't necessarily know that to be true. It's like an abductive logic way of thinking about what might be happening back there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where the regulatory aspect of this also ties in, because that's very much like trust is huge with
Yeah.
that.
I might suggest that an app store has a package manager somewhere inside it, but it also has so much other stuff,
Yeah.
right? Um, like it has, you got a whole submission pipeline and QA and policy and all these things, which like if you think about open source package managers, they don't really have any of those things, or they maybe do, but like the way that governance is done is done like differently and maybe with different sort of different commercial models.
Yeah, I like sometimes just zooming in and just putting a bunch of the little things that I think are inside this
Right.
box.
Right.
Yeah.
It's fractal.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And then the other thing, yeah, and Ryan mentions moderation, ratings, pricing, credit card processing, all that kind of stuff, right? So the other thing that I saw in chat was this issue of bidirectionality. So this is like a bit of a paradoxical thing with Wardley mapping that happens sometimes, which is you find yourself trying to figure out which of the components to put above which other component in the value chain. Like, well, does the app depend on the app store, or does the app store depend on the app, or like I think I'm pointing at the wrong example, but here's the tricky thing. Wardley maps use a value chain structure. So if you delete the evolution left rightness here and you just focus on the value chain part of it, right, where it's just the parts in a set of relationships, from top to bottom is an implication of dependency. So listeners depend on filling the void with music. Filling the void with music depends on discovering new music. And so that means you can't actually represent bidirectional relationships in a Wardley map. They don't exist because it's a directed acyclic graph. Relationships only go one way. Now, that obviously conflicts with what we know about reality, right? So the trick is, how do you sometimes, like, you need to dig into the detail to sort of actually break it down into these individual parts. And so then you can be like, well, okay, the app depends on the package manager, but maybe there's another part in here that depends on some other part of the map. And so, like, actually you can represent it in a truthfully directional way, but you have to get more specific in order to make that valid.
Right.
But what I'll also say with that is it doesn't matter.
The other thing that Simon says though is that like your map can also represent like capital flows, right? So so that the satisfaction of needs going down is because we're all capitalists here, it is matched by a corresponding flow of capital up, right? Like it's the desire for the capital to flow upwards that causes things below. Wait a minute, is it that way around? Now I'm confusing myself. That it's sorry, that's wrong. But it's so supply and demand competition. So it's the is that right? Capital flows upwards.
Well, it flows upwards to a different user.
No,
right?
Sorry, capital flows downwards, right? Needs are satisfied upwards.
Yep.
Right. Dependencies go down. Needs are satisfied up, and capital flows down. That's the way that works.
Well, it's tricky because it also depends, right? Because another way you could frame it is you could say, well, there's the listener, but there's also the shareholders.
Fair.
Right.
Yeah.
So then capital could be flowing up, and
right, and then there's like Coldplay as well. So
there we go. Or U2 was the Apple.
U2, that's right.
forgot about that almost. Okay, so excellent.
Yeah, you could have a whole side conversation about installation and U2, but we shouldn't go there.
Yes. No, we should. I agree. We should not.
Yeah, hostile intervention, or I don't know. Anyway, U2 appearing where I didn't expect it to appear. So then the other thing is the qualities. How do you differentiate the qualities of a thing from a thing itself? I think was the question that Tristan had, and that was like just coming back to this thing where we were like, hey, so we were trying to describe an act, like we started with access was what we had said first, and then we were like, well, it's mobile access, and it's a device, and so we were trying to distinguish whether like the mobility of it was a quality or a thing unto itself. And I think the really rough answer to that is you just have to sort of guess and see if it works.
Yeah.
Now, that said, there are qualities that are implied by the left-right positioning, right? From, Genesis to commodity, right? Things that have qualities that align with certain stages of evolution, those might just need to be implied by their position. So mobility, like, I'm not sure there's a way for me to express mobility or stationariness with evolution. So I can't just imply it by placing it from the left to the right somewhere. But it's also true that maybe it's not like a separate component. Like what if it's like, okay, we said access. And guess what? Like it's allowed to have other qualities other than evolution.
Yep.
Jay Bloom talks about cost of change. I think it's like a Gary Booch software thing about like architectural difficulty. But like we could sit here and just like go, hey, all right, cost of change 5 on a scale from 1 to 5, right? Or we could say it's a blue, it's blue,
Right.
or it's mobile.
Right.
But then like also it might be useful to think of the mobile versions of a thing, like mobile access devices, as a thing unto themselves.
Right. Well. So I would say the way I would maybe break that down is to say, okay, fine. Is it important that these access devices are mobile? Yes. Okay. Well, what components below that confer mobility on that device?
Ooh.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, that's easy, right? LTE networks. Then all of that whole regulatory mess. And
radio waves.
Radio, right? Exactly.
Batteries.
And batteries. Yep. Good point. At this point, you could probably say like low power. You can get into like low power CPUs and stuff, but then you get into like one instruction set architecture versus the other, and blah blah blah. But it's probably too far down. But the point is that we can just say that LTE enabled LTE in batteries, the evolution of LTE and of long range radio networks and batteries enabled compute devices to go from being tethered to being mobile, right?
Oh, that's fabulous. And from the standpoint of evolution itself, from left to right, at first all the devices are probably stationary when they were first invented, right. And then over time they changed. Their qualities changed, but also like what literal parts made them up changed too. So it's like almost like it's no longer like the same thing, but if you look at it and you squint from left to right as it goes across the evolutionary axis, it's like, well, okay, that's actually still the device, still a form of a device. I don't know. It's a really fascinating thing to get lost into. So anyway, thank you for allowing me to rabbit hole on that a little bit.
Right.
So yeah, we've identified this like really interesting thing, which is, okay, the device itself is tied to the App Store, and somehow we need to connect that back to the music library, I think. Or perhaps the music service?
Well, isn't it just that the device is needed to run the app, and the app is needed to access the music service.
Makes sense to me.
Like I guess like isn't it already correct the way it's mapped, or is there something more nuanced that we want to say?
Uh,
I'm okay with this for
it
now.
seems fine to me. Yeah, I just wanted to like kind of call it out, right? So the
Hmm.
music streaming service, it, does it is it only this part that has the incumbency effect, or
That's
where
the
would you?
point, right? So now I think we get to the question of what is install,
Hmm. Okay.
um, and and how do you show that, um, right? Or
Whew.
is another way of saying it audience, or is another way of saying it like the fact that it's your device, that it's Apple's device, gives them like um, be careful with my language here, but gives them leverage, or gives them an advantage over Spotify in their ability to address prospects,
Hmm.
right? Uh, so maybe like so thinking about the customer life cycle, right? You've got the listener, but before, and this is where you're going from like basic, instead of just talking about the basic needs that you're satisfying. Now you're framing the listener as like someone who's at some point in the customer life cycle with this music streaming service.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, hang on a minute. Does the music streaming service have a customer life cycle or something? Or does the music streaming service have a customer? Yes, that's the listener. And does the listener then? So what about the person who, it's almost like a Zen koan, but like, what was the listener before they signed up for Spotify, right? Like,
They were still
um,
a listener.
they were still a listener, right? So, um, yeah, I'm just trying to get at like the point about pre-installed Apple Music is that it gives Apple access to listeners, to more listeners than Spotify before they become customers, right? And it gives them access to the opportunity to acquire them, I guess.
So I'm just writing down some things that I hear you saying.
So I think this now we're talking about a different need, a different stakeholder and a different need here, right? Because here the stakeholder is the platform, or the stakeholder is the app
Yeah,
developer, right?
because I think on the listener side, you'll have things like, is this your first device? Do you already have a relationship with Spotify before you buy the
Right,
device? Are you on a non-iPhone platform? Things like that.
right,
But for the platform, this absolutely matters.
right.
Or
So it's
for
like,
Apple, right?
yeah, right, exactly. So well, let's. I'm going to put platform here as well, and we can sort
Mm-hmm.
of just leave it sort of staring at us for a bit. But I think app developers are like what I would say about app developers is that they need uh, an audience, right?
Mm.
Um, right, and I think it's kind of probably oversimplistic to say that Spotify is an app developer, right? But maybe we should just acknowledge that now. We should actually, sorry Ben, you've just made a nice icon, but I would say that this is a business,
Excellent.
right? uh, and like businesses need customers, right? And in order to have customers, they need. Oh, hang on a minute, I'm just going now, right? Business needs a customer. Uh, but in order to have a customer, they need an addressable audience, right? Which then I don't know how I would break that down. Oh, there you go. We've got all the icons.
It's the most important
Um,
part.
Well, that could fit into the customer need
you think?
or to the user need, possibly, because the addressable audience depends upon a need, right, from a user.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. So then the addressable audience has the need to listen to music, right? The address, like now you're sort of you're superimposing two maps right? You're
Well,
one from the list.
I would even connect this to this.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I was going to say
Yeah.
here, but yeah, you're right. It's up in fill the
Yep.
void with music.
Yep.
Okay.
I'll
Well,
try to dig
we
up
should just move
an example
upstairs.
too. Like Simon has, oh, he's got a map of mapping that does something really interesting.
Hmm.
Let me try to find it real quick because I think it might be interesting and helpful here. Let me see at Swardley map of mapping. Maybe I can copy and paste it in here and show you. Oh, where are you? There we go. Okay, all right. So here's the weird thing that Simon's map does, and I'm gonna push this off to the far right. Once this image uploads to the Mirrorverse. So Simon's got this map of Wardley mapping, and he's got like this interesting thing going on here where there's a line, and it's different than the line that we have on our map. This one is actually about, this is the system that serves Simon, and this is the system that serves Simon's users.
Mm.
So I'm curious what you
Yeah,
think about that.
Oh, that's interesting. So like now you're saying because usually as a business person you are asked to draw your Wardley map by starting by thinking of your customer. But what you're sort of saying now is actually uh, your business is the customer of its customers in some way, right? Like
Yep.
your customer is supplying business to your business, which I think is fascinating, and starts to get a bit circular, but also is super cool. So then I think it's actually very applicable to this map, and we can just totally go there, and we'll probably crash and burn, but let's try it. So then I'm just literally just putting all of those businessy, audience-y customer needs on top of that.
Sure.
And then just saying that shall I delete listener because it's just the same as okay.
Deleting is always good.
And then I'll just put like a face next to the customer and a face
Yay.
next. Right, and then you can very easily say, all right, up north here is the sort of business and platform and app considerations, right? So now you need customer onboarding and you need marketing, and I've never done it this way before. That's so cool.
It's exciting.
Yeah. So then, and we haven't got, there's no, we haven't, I don't think we've got all the maturity stuff right yet. So cool.
It's exciting.
Okay, so in order to have a customer, you need to have what? Awareness, I guess, or something, which needs marketing, and it needs placement. And now you've got installs, right? So installs is one way in which I think, right? So that's where like you're saying, okay, Apple has a huge placement advantage. I don't know if does this work for you guys?
I'm with you. I'm fascinated.
And then obviously like the thing that can get like there are many things that can get you placement, but one of the things that can get you placement is owning the rails, right? So that's where this bit of the map up top here with my pen, this bit of the map here then relates down to, and you can zoom out a bit, relates to this bit of the map down here. And so like then you can start to ask yourself, the really interesting strategic questions like what should Spotify do, right? And part of what Spotify is doing is just saying, well, we build an app everywhere, like our apps. Actually, that's fine, but you can actually you can become aware of Spotify wherever you are, even on Android. But B, also, like, you have more choice over where to consume, which is a different need. And then C, you start to get into content, right? And you start to get into the question of, okay, what is Spotify competing for versus what is Apple competing for, right? And you can sort of see how, right? Then you can start to see how, Apple's whole attitude to this thing is really just, eyeballs, or I guess ear holes in the case of music, right? And is just, well, we have this subscription bundle. We can keep adding to it. We'll add music to it, and so on and so forth. And it will just be like, so it's like Apple's idea is just like for people who just want music as a utility, right? And so Apple's view of music as a utility, I mean, that's probably even correct, right? Music kind of, I'm really sorry for all to all the music artists in the audience and in the and on this call, but like, if you can treat like music as a utility, then you can see how Spotify is responding to that by going to non-music forms of audio, like new forms of audio content, right? You've got so they got into podcasts, right, which is a form of user-generated content.
Yep.
And they just bought Locker Room, which is like Clubhouse for sports. And so those are kind of like, Spotify wants to own your ear holes, and Apple wants to own your eyeballs, I guess.
But I need those.
We need them.
Something that happened in my brain when you were describing this, and it's why I was having such kind of like an intense moment over here, is that there's this book of like really interesting and weird stuff called Managing Flow. It's by, gosh, I can't even see it on my bookshelf now. It's by a number of researchers talking about knowledge-based firms. One of the authors' last name is Nonaka, Nonaka, or Nonoka. I forget. You'll have to look it up. But basically, one of the things they talk about is like, in a knowledge-oriented economy, what firms are doing is basically setting. They're describing the futures that they envision. And so one of the first things that happened whenever we put the business above the customer was like, oh, is this like violating some sort of like Wardley dogma where like you're supposed to put the user at the top? And I realized, oh, no, that's okay, because we're creating a more full appreciation of the system. And yes, we depend on the user, and the user depends on this value that we're hopefully creating for them. But it's all part of a big system, and that's fine. And so then I was just like trying to figure that part out. But then I realized the thing that unlocks this being actually fine, as opposed to just being something to sort of hand wave away, is what is the future world that each firm is envisioning? What, like, the reason that they're doing the work that they're doing in order to meet the needs that they're meeting is to produce some sort of future vision of the world. And you mentioned Apple's future as being music as a utility. What's Spotify's future? Audio everywhere?
Yeah, I think Spotify is basically leaning into this this idea that audio entertainment is something that is much less time constrained than video entertainment, because you can listen to stuff while you're doing other things, right? And so they're basically saying, look, if we can just own like access to all of the different ways of things going into your ears, then we like we actually have, like, the size of that opportunity is actually bigger in some ways than like owning all of video, um, or whatever, simply because of like time available to consume.
Yeah.
So I think they're just, yeah, I think there's a sort of fit between Spotify's business need and the sort of real world sensory constraints of humans, right? Which is that, oh, ears are asynchronous, great. Hearing is asynchronous, right? And or not asynchronous, but parallel, I guess, to like doing other stuff, or can be. I mean, I actually can't listen to people talking while I'm trying to write stuff for work, but some people can.
I can play video games while listening to like live streams and video games. Good combo for me.
Right,
Yeah.
right, exactly. So,
Huh.
so yeah. Anyway, so that's like, so the dimension that Apple, Apple is like, we want to own like distribution of apps on mobile devices, which they've done a pretty good job of, right? And they're getting into like a bunch of like quite diversified, but also it's already starting to look very traditional. Those models, like the Apple TV Play, right? This video over the top streaming, Apple Music, like traditional sort of over the top music streaming. But they're not really innovating in those things. What they're just taking their audience and they're aggregating that audience, and they're aggregating a whole bunch of like those now sort of content features into that audience, right? So it's like their ambition for the audio space is completely different than Spotify's, is my feeling. And you can kind of see that as well by sorry to say this, but by the quality of the products they put out, right? By the relative level of like attention that they pay to Apple Music as a product versus like how Spotify thinks, which is it's everything, right?
Yeah, I think that's important too to discuss a little bit. Is like, I think when we're looking at the Wardley map, you're kind of looking at a larger business context, but when you get down to like a project and product level, you start to get into differentiators around quality, around, I mean, it comes from the higher level up, but like you said, like they're not innovating exactly in the space. It's more like maybe pushing things to commodity and letting it sit there. And that plays a huge role in like how things move in the future. When I was looking at what you did up here with the business needs and stuff, that just in my head, I think you work in product. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do.
So like when you're working at maybe a project level or product strategy level, when you're thinking about all the user needs, like fill the void with music is maybe like an need, and then there's tons of like subcategories of needs under that. But ideally or theoretically, you should be tying all of those user needs back to business needs as much as possible. And to me, like when you're doing this, I'm like, oh, okay, well, this is just kind of tying the user need to the business need.
Yeah, it's like
I thought that was really cool.
I think you've got to be careful with like how you say that. Like, I think you're right that like ultimately the satisfaction of user needs has to like translate to some value for your business because you're a business. But if you do that prematurely, right, it can become like you'll definitely find like local maxima, right? You'll by trying to force your user experience in to be too much like the way your business needs to be, you're not gonna make people satisfied, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah. So I know you have a hard stop here, James. I really wanted to thank you for spending your time with us on this. This was absolutely fabulous.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun. It was I learned something here, right? Like I learned quite a lot about like, wait, who's the real customer here? Maybe the business is the customer of its customers, for example.
Oh, fabulous. So where can people find you if they want to learn more about you and your work and ask you questions about, how you use mapping and things like that?
Well, I mean, you can follow me on Twitter, I guess. I'm twitter.com/jfairbairn, which I don't know, you can probably figure it out from the description on this video. Apart from that, I don't tweet a lot about work, but I tweet about perspectives and things that I find interesting going on in the tech and tech adjacent worlds. So yeah.
Fabulous. Yeah, and thank you for being here. David, as always, thank you also for helping us out and holding down the fort. And I love the design perspective that you provide for this as well. We learned some stuff, and I'm excited about that. And of course, to the audience, to everyone out there in chat, thank you for having such a vibrant conversation. It was like really fascinating seeing all of this scroll by. Lovely questions, and you all are lovely people. Thank you for coming. If you want to hear more, if you want to see the map that we made, go to @HiredThought on Twitter. Give me a follow, and I'll be posting the map on there. David, you're David C. Hall on Twitter. David C. Hall, I should say, on Twitter as well, right? And let's see. The only other thing I should mention is that April 21st, we're running another big workshop. So go to lwm.events for news on upcoming workshops, also upcoming live streams. So as we get folks scheduled, we're trying to get at least one every week. So please, lwm.events to go check that stuff out, get those things added to your calendar. Thank you, everyone. And any final words, you two?
Thank you very much. It was awesome.
Right. Yeah, thank you.
All right, knowledge is power. Go make some maps, make some knowledge, and we'll see you around.